Before I tell you all about the great books that I read in the first month of 2024, I need to tell you about the most exciting thing that I did this month. In case you missed it, I have launched a book editing service. If you're a writer and you have a manuscript for a novel or a short story and you're looking to self-publish it or send it off to agents and publishers, I am offering a brand new book editing service. Send me your manuscript and I will copy edit it, fixing all the typos and the grammar mistakes, and advising you on how you might improve sections. And when all the edits are done, I will write a detailed review at the end of the book, telling you the things that I really love, the things that I think are great about your book, as well as all of the detailed things that I think you could do to improve and enhance your writing. Since launching this service, I have edited multiple short stories and one novel, and I have loved every second of it. If you want to know more, there is a link in the description to my portfolio, along with testimonials from the writers that I've worked with so far. I adore editing. I'm really good at it. So if you've got a manuscript and you want me to look at it and you want me to edit it, send it my way. Now on to the big stack. 2024 started off pretty strong for me because the first brand new book of this year that I got to review was Not a River by Selva Almada. Selva Almada is my favorite Argentinian author, and this book, like her previous novel Brickmakers, was translated into English by Annie McDermott, who is a phenomenal Spanish to English translator. In case you missed my review, Not a River is the third in a loosely tied together trilogy. The only way that these three books are connected is through their themes. And the predominant theme in those books is masculinity. In all three books, Selva Almada examines and deconstructs different aspects of masculinity and patriarchy. And I would argue this one is the most complicated and vague. The Wind That Lays Waste and Brickmakers are both very on the nose when it comes to what they're exploring, but Not a River is a lot more subtle than that. It's still a really short novel that I read in a single day. It's written with very minimalistic language, and it very deftly explores man's relationship to nature as well as other men, and it is a book that's full of tragedy and sorrow. I am always impressed with what Selva Almada does, and she did not disappoint with Not a River. If you want to know more about this, go check out my review. Selva Almada is a phenomenal force in Argentinian fiction, and I urge everyone to read her. Because of the atrocities that are currently being carried out in Gaza, I decided it was finally time to read Minor Detail, a book that has been everywhere recently, for obvious reasons and rightly so. Minor Detail is a short Palestinian novel by Adania Shibli, and it was translated staggeringly well from Arabic into English by Elizabeth Jacquet. I buddy read this with my friend Amber, we talked a lot about it afterwards, and I made a video about it that you can go watch. Minor Detail is fascinating in its structure because it is two stories stitched together right down the middle, each one taking up exactly half of the full book. The first takes place shortly after the Nakba, and the other takes place in almost the modern day. These two interconnected stories are very obviously about occupation and apartheid, but they're more than that. They're also stories about journalistic integrity. They're stories about patriarchy and sexism, and they are two stories that are so incredibly well structured, where every single word matters and carries its own weight and gravity. And to be able to communicate that through translation into English is really staggering work. Elizabeth Jacquet is a phenomenal translator. If you want to know my full thoughts, go check out my video, but given what's happening right now, we owe it to ourselves to read and enjoy as much Palestinian art and literature as possible, so go read Minor Detail. One of my reading goals for 2024 is to read more YA fiction, since I have recently discovered that YA fiction is actually fantastic. And one of the best YA novels that I have read and enjoyed so far is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This is a young adult thriller that is written half in traditional prose and half in an epistolary style. It's set in a small town in modern day England, and it's about a teenage girl who is hopefully headed to Cambridge University soon, but right now in her last year of school, she's doing this extracurricular project. The subject for her project is to reopen a case that everyone thinks is closed and done with, which is that of the disappearance and assumed murder of a girl in this small town. Apparently her boyfriend did it, and he ended his own life shortly afterwards, but Pippa's not happy with that conclusion, so she digs into the case. She spends the entire novel unraveling what really happened, and I was absolutely glued to the page. This is the most Moorish, thing. You will not stop reading. I was a little bit worried, even though I now realize how great YA is. I was still concerned that a YA thriller would just read a little juvenile. And I was naive and silly for thinking so, because this is a fantastically well-written story. I'm amazed, absolutely stunned. I can also feel it in my bones that 2024 is the year of science fiction for me, slightly putting gothic fiction on the back burner to read more sci-fi. And I completely thank Star Trek Voyager for that. The Ones We're Meant to Find by Joan Her is both sci-fi and YA, so ticking off 2 boxes. This is Joan Her's second novel. Her first was Descendant of the Crane, which I haven't read. That, as far as I know, was a fantasy story, and this is more speculative science fiction. Now, even though it is YA, this is a wonderfully literary novel. It is told from the perspectives of 2 sisters, and we flip back and forth between them as the novel goes on. The older sister, Celia, has been stranded on a deserted island for 3 years, all alone, with a little half-functioning robot companion for company. There's a house that she lives in, and she's been spending these 3 years trying to get off the island, even though she can't remember life before it. She has no memory of life before arriving there, except for the fact that she has a sister. She doesn't really remember her sister in a lot of detail. She sometimes dreams of her, but she doesn't know how reliable those dreams are, and she wants to get back to her sister. That younger sister is Casey, and Casey lives in a suspended eco-city, because the world is ending. Natural disasters are everywhere. Casey is a young genius who misses her sister, who has just gone missing. Her story picks up just 3 months after Celia has gone missing. And through her eyes, we get to understand this eco-city and what has become of the world. It's a really twisty-turny novel. It is slow, it is speculative. I saw one review compare it to the works of Kazuo Ishiguro, my favorite author, and it's certainly not as good as anything he's ever written, but it's not bad at all. Not everyone can be Kazuo Ishiguro. I understand the comparison though. And The Ones We're Meant to Find is a really fantastic book with an amazing cover. Look at that. Now, I promised myself in January that I would read a big stack of Scottish fiction because I now live in Scotland and I love it here. I had 5 books and I didn't actually manage to read them all, but I did read this. The Pharmacist, which some people have called sci-fi, and I disagree, and others have called a thriller, which I more so agree with. The Pharmacist was written by Scottish-Egyptian author Rachel Atala, and it's okay. It's fine. The Pharmacist is set entirely in an underground bunker, like the shelters in the Fallout video games. There is a small community in this shelter, and our protagonist is the pharmacist of this community. Now, The Guardian on the back says that this is reminiscent of 1984. I'm not sure I would go that far, but I understand where they're coming from. It is a story of dystopia, I suppose. It's a very claustrophobic novel about what it's like being in this small community that has a pretty enigmatic leader who starts to become more unhinged as the story goes on, and the pharmacist becomes closer to him because she's got the stuff he wants. There are conspiracies to untangle, there is a lot of interpersonal drama here, a lot of mysteries, but none of it is all that original or exciting. I think the biggest selling point for the pharmacist is the claustrophobia, the way in which you really feel like you know every floor, ceiling, and wall by the end of the novel, even though it's a book and you never see any of it, but you can see it, you can feel it. You really get a sense for how big this space is, or rather how small it is, and you do feel trapped in this shelter with these people. And I think that's very, very effective. Unfortunately, the plot and the characters are not all that interesting. In the end, The Pharmacist is fine. And the other Scottish novel that I managed to read this month is Poor Things by Alistair Gray, who is widely regarded to be 20th century Scotland's greatest author. Now, my previous video before this one was all about this novel and the incredible recent film adaptation by visionary Greek film director Yorgos Lanthimos. So I'm not going to talk about this here at all. I really would like you to go watch that video. In it, I talk about the Poor Things novel, its legacy, and how the film built on everything that Alistair Gray did here with this book. Poor Things is amazing. It really is an astonishing work of genius, and the film also is. So go watch my video, read the book, watch the film, all that stuff, but mostly watch my video so you can watch me talk for way too long with so much passion and aggression about how much I love the book and the film even more so. Sticking with the sci-fi theme, I also recently did a video on this, Leviathan Wakes, the first book in the Expanse epic sci-fi series. That video I made absolutely tanked. No one gave a single solitary shit about that video and I guess about this book. And that's fair enough because, again, this book is also only okay. It has a lot of really, really high points and a lot of really tragically low points, which evens everything out to being just okay. I'm not going to carry on with the series, but I am going to switch to the TV show. I hear that the show is better. The people who left comments in that video said that the show is better. They also said that the book series does get better as it goes, but I cannot invest enough of my time and energy into 9 enormous books just in the hope that I end up agreeing with people and that they get a little bit better. I have way more pressing things to do with my time. This is called a space opera and I disagree. It's not a space opera. It is a very pathetic and sad view of future space capitalism. I am hugely disappointed by it for many reasons, and if you do want to know why, go check out my video. But as I said, that video is also full of praise because there is a lot to love and respect about this novel. But the stuff I dislike is more important than the stuff that I like. Here we have The Luminous Dead. This is a science fiction horror novel by American author Caitlin Starling. I picked this up at the independent queer bookshop in South Glasgow. Category is books. If you're in Glasgow, if you're in Scotland, if you're in Britain, go visit that lovely, wonderful bookshop. The best thing that The Luminous Dead for me was get me to reinstall Dead Space on my PS5 and play that again. I love Dead Space. It is one of my favorite video games of all time, partly because I love space horror. Alien is one of my favorite films. Event Horizon is another one of my favorite films. And John Carpenter's The Thing, even though it's not set in space, still adheres to that rule. Isolated place, creepy science fiction horror. And then we have The Luminous Dead, which is the first novel, I think, that I've read that matches that genre. Isolated science fiction horror. I don't know why I numbered those. The Luminous Dead is set far in the future, where humanity is mining planets for various ores. Our protagonist is a young woman who works a very solitary job as a caver. She goes down into the caves, deep under the ground of these uninhabited planets, to map out the underground for mining companies to then start digging. She's down there all alone for weeks upon weeks at a time, in a special spacesuit that keeps her alive and gives her all of the oxygen and nutrients and medicine that she needs, and her only point of contact is a mysterious woman on the other end of the radio. This whole novel is about their relationship. It kind of functions as a haunted house story because as it goes on, the horror ramps up and you start to wonder what is in fact real. Now our protagonist has a weird sci-fi name and I'm not sure how to pronounce it. In my head I said Gaia, but it might be Jaya. It is exactly the same as one of the random nonsense words in Lewis Carroll's poem The Jabberwocky from Alice Through the Looking Glass. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did Gaia and gimble in the wabe. I've actually got the Jabberwocky tattooed on me. I don't think I've ever told anyone that, but I have 'twas brillig on my wrists. I thought it was a cool idea. Gaia is down in these caves, very, very isolated, and just like The Pharmacist, the thing that this book does so well is make you feel very, very claustrophobic and frightened. It is intensely atmospheric. But the thing that I really didn't like about this book is that it's way, way, way too long. When I did my reading habits video, one of my patrons said that if they're kind of getting bored or antsy with a novel, they will actually skip ahead and see if it picks up. I actually did that with this. I got to like a third of the way through. I was getting really bored and antsy because it's way too slow and way too long, so I skipped over to beyond the halfway point, picked it back up again, realised I had missed out nothing of importance at all, and just carried on reading to the end, and it worked brilliantly. Proof that this is a novel that's just way, way too long and could have had a lot cut out. It's around 400 pages, and it could have been 250 pages, and then it would have been a perfect piece of science fiction horror. Psychological pressure, tension, and claustrophobia. It's really, really great. It's just way too long. It did not need to be this long. One woman alone in a cave. Rein it in a bit. Another book that I was really happy to read and review this month is the brand new non-fiction, A Short History of Transmisogyny. This was written by historian Jules Gill Peterson, and it is a tough read to say the least. A Short History of Transmisogyny really is short. I read it in a single day, and it is separated into 5 parts. An intro and a conclusion, and 3 big chapters. You can listen to all of this in my full review if you're interested. This is a book that explores the history of transmisogyny, and to oversimplify and summarize it way too simply, transmisogyny, like so many things, was born out of colonialism, and this book explores the history of that colonialism in multiple different places, by the British, and how all of that expanded into the racism and sexism that also morphed into trans misogyny. As a trans woman, this book made me angry and uncomfortable and sad, but it was also immediately enlightening and powerful. Go check out my full review for more details. The very first book that I read in 2024 was Welcome to the Honam Bookshop. This is a very cozy Korean novel by Hwangbo Rum and translated into English by Shana Tan. It tells the story of a woman in her 30s who left her husband, who left her job, and started a fresh life by opening her own bookshop. And the whole novel follows the first year or two of her opening and growing this bookshop. The community that she builds, the people that she hires, the regulars that she meets and gets to know. It's a novel without much plot, but it is a surprisingly philosophical novel, exploring one's purpose in life and how we find happiness and joy and freedom. It is cozy, but also thought-provoking and engaging. It's not perfect. It's a little bit dry in its writing. The characters are a little flat, especially our protagonist. There's not much to her, but it certainly makes you feel warm, and it also gets the cogs turning, and I appreciate it for that. If you want to know more, go check out my video. As you probably know, I am trying to reread old classics and favorites a lot more often. I'm really bad at rereading books, and so I asked my patrons to help me choose old books that I love, that I want to revisit, reread, rediscover, re-enjoy. And for January, my patrons chose The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Again, I did a video on this that you can go check out. It didn't do as well as I hoped. I really thought that that video would be way more popular because when I gave my patrons a bunch of books to vote on, this won by an absolute landslide. It stole at least 50% of the votes. So I really thought other people would care more about the video, and they haven't yet, so go give it some love if you haven't watched it yet. Now, this is all 5 books in Douglas Adams' trilogy in 5 parts, but I only read the first one, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I have read all 5, but for my reread, I only read the first. And as you'll see from my video, what I found was a rediscovery of everything I already loved. But it's been like 10 years since I read the books originally, and I am smarter and more worldly than I was at that point. I've traveled around the world and back again, I've met a lot of people, and I've read a lot of books, so I found that there was a lot more to appreciate that I missed the first time. The satire hit me harder, the jokes were funnier somehow, and I really honestly appreciated the Britishness of it all. The dark, satirical and sarcastic humour of it rang truer than it did 10 years ago for me. Maybe just because I've gotten older. I also forgot just how bleak it is. This is a fun and funny story. It is a story of adventure, but it's also pretty sad. I mean, Earth blows up at the beginning. I think the tragedy of these books didn't hit me very hard at the time, but this time, yeah, a lot more. So go check out my video to know my full thoughts after rereading and rediscovering The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This is Hela and Death by Oscar Jensen, another brand new book that came out in January and I got to review it. Thank you, Viper. This is a return to / an homage to the golden age of crime fiction. Very Agatha Christie. It's set in modern day England. Our protagonist is a Danish guy who was part of a group of friends at Oxford University 10 years ago, and these friends have all reconvened in their early 30s in a lonely country manor house in the dead of winter in a snowstorm. They cannot leave. Not that they should want to, they've met up for a party, but they've all been invited there by the one friend who made his fortune by developing an app straight out of university. And when they're all sat around for a dinner party, he reveals to them that he's dying. And from that moment on, we get an absolutely wonderful whodunit, golden age murder mystery story. I was gripped by this, I loved it so much. Go check out my review for more information, but Hela and Death is an awful lot of fun for any fan of Agatha Christie and the golden age of crime. Unfortunately, however, I kind of ended this month on a sad note. This is a Batman comic that really disappointed me. The Batman Who Laughs was written by Scott Snyder, one of my favourite comic book writers, and drawn by Jock, a Scottish comic book artist whom I absolutely adore. Now, Scott Snyder and Jock have worked together quite a few times. When Scott Snyder first started writing Batman, like 15-20 years ago, he teamed up with Jock to write something called The Black Mirror, which is an amazing Batman comic that I've still got somewhere behind me. They also worked on an original series called Witches that I really loved, a really cool horror story. And so the two of them coming back together for this, the story of a Batman from a parallel universe who is also the Joker. It's such a wild, exciting, fun time. But this is shit. This is bloody awful. Scott Snyder is probably still my favourite Batman writer, tied with Grant Morrison. And Jock is an amazing artist, especially of bleak and dark and twisted horror stuff. But The Batman Who Laughs is awful. It's full of weird fan service. It's a convoluted, nonsensical plot. The characters do not behave like they should. Batman doesn't sound like Batman. Jim Gordon doesn't behave like Jim Gordon. None of the familiar characters from the Batman canon that we all love and appreciate, they are not themselves here, and it's certainly not done on purpose. These are just badly written versions of themselves, written by a guy who's been writing Batman for like 15, 20 years. I don't understand it. I'm so confused. It can't have been 20 years. 15. Let's say 15 years. Anyway, this really is not what I expected. It's not what I hoped for. And the character of the Batman Who Laughs was created by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo a few years ago for a big event comic. And that was a great event. It was called Dark Knight's Metal. And it was good. It was a lot of fun. This is not. If you're a Batman fan, don't bother. I was so disappointed. It was an absolute slog to get through. And I really am shocked that two veterans of the industry, who both love Batman and have worked on Batman a lot, put out something like this. What the hell? Also, very quickly, I almost forgot to mention a manga that I read. If it's not on the stack, I forget it's there. I read this manga digitally, so I don't have it to hand. I read most of my manga digitally. And this manga is Should. S-H-W-D, pronounced should, by Sono N. This is a really, really fun manga. It is science fiction, it is action, and it's also a sapphic manga. It is about two butch women who work for a private military company who deal with these monstrous things that exist kind of mysteriously thanks to a previous war. We don't know who the war was between. We just know that they were a biological weapon created by someone during this war. Now the war is over and these things still prowl the streets and they are just these grotesque monsters. And this private military company put them down. And we follow two women who work in a very masculine department who are both really, really butch, really, really cool, really interesting people, who are steadily falling in love with each other. There's not much to it, honestly. It's a very, very simple, stripped down, and easy to enjoy manga. It's full of action, it's full of fun, a little bit of comedy, and the romance between these two women builds really, really slowly and kind of tantalizingly in a teasing way. I read the first volume, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I don't know if I'll keep going with it, but if I get the urge to pick up the second, I'll let you know. There you go, that is everything I read in January. Once again, if you are a writer and you are interested in my editing services, the link to my portfolio is in the description, and I would love to help you with your book. Go read some good stuff and subscribe for books.